couldn't buy ready-made gears with high enough gears.
He was amazing. Yeah. It must have been.
But
really,
you dig that car weighed about the same as a Volkswagen Beetle.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Really? God. It must
and
have
so
been.
it had a big Ford V8 in it, so it went like a bat.
He was something. He was so great. It must have been grand to have been in his presence. You know, I mean, in a friendly, in a friend way. Yeah.
He was a very friendly and loving man.
Yeah, I know.
Except when he was at the wheel of his yacht.
Then he was
Then
serious.
he was Captain Bligh. The only thing missing was the whips.
Welcome very much. Welcome very much to Conversation, where we have Jay Baldwin. Jay Baldwin is one of the co-editors of the new Millennium Whole Earth catalog, and he's been one of the editors at the Whole Earth Review, and he's a long-term friend and associate and a colleague in a certain real sense of the man that we both, in a certain sense, before the camera agreed was the Leonardo da Vinci of our time, that being our Buckminster Fuller. And Jay Baldwin, welcome very much to Conversations and to New York City.
Well, it's nice to be here.
Yeah, it really is a pleasure to welcome you. We have a number of things, and I want to show let's just sort of, in a sense, get it out of the way, because, if I may, take a minute and say that you're here in New York because there's going to be a gathering at the Cooper Hewitt Museum, which I think the Smithsonian's sort of involved with.
Yes, they're involved.
But it's going to be showing Chris Zelos' film Ecological Design, and then launching, in a certain sense, among a lot of ecologically minded people, the Millennium Whole Earth catalog, which photographs not very well. I'll put it up here for people to see because it's blaringly white with the Earth floating in the white. But it's the new catalog that's out now. We're talking now in November of 1994, and he's one of the primary if I may say so, co-editors of the journal of the catalog, and he's a particular. He has the parts on Buckminster Fuller, who was, as Stuart Brand said, the inspiration, the original inspiration for the original Whole Earth catalog way back when. So I wonder, maybe we could start with that. We want to before we get too far into the program, we want to set up and let people know about the Whole Earth catalog. But we were just reminiscing in a sense. You knew Buckminster Fuller in a personal student way, but you knew him from the time you were a very young man.
In
maybe you could share a little of that. You met him
in 1951.
Yeah. Oh, way back, right?
Yeah.
And you were where? You were at Ann Arbor, you said,
yes,
at that time?
University of Michigan.
And he was as prolific in his intellectual musings and so forth at that time as he was later when he became more a world figure around in 1968 and 67 and so forth?
In 1951 was the year that Fuller became really well known because he built a dome over a building that no longer exists at the Ford Motor Company.
Uh-huh.
And the dome that he built over that building was the biggest dome that had been built since the Dome of St. Peter's in Rome.
Wow.
And it was bigger than the St. Peter's Dome, and it weighed dramatically less.
Yes, of course it would, right. I wonder what was the material covered that dome with? He didn't have Teflon to cover it.
No, it was an aluminum structure covered with, I think it had 22,000 pieces of aluminum,
right,
something like that, and it was covered in fiberglass.
Yeah.
Which didn't work very well, by the way.
Right. Yeah, that's just, that
was all new.
That would have been one of the synergistic things that was coming. Teflon down the line
Yes.
would have been coming to feed in, but it was geodesic.
Yes.
And it was built, he still had his principles of geodesic,
Yes.
which have now been included into the buckyballs and so forth, the molecules of universe. And he was working in accord with the universe, and he had this comprehensive view of the world at that time, and
Yes.
was as lovely as he was at that. He was such a beautiful fellow. I mean, it must have been a great pleasure to have been able to be a friend of his, except as you just indicated to me, on the yacht he was Captain Bligh, right?
Yeah, on his yacht he was Captain Bligh, and he'd holler to snap it up on the foredeck, and just short of getting out the flogging whip.
Yeah.
But the comprehensiveness,
yeah,
he saw that it was necessary for designers to be comprehensive.
right.
So that because what designers do is we manage the interface between technology and the environment, and technology and people.
Right.
That boundary between the two is managed by people who call themselves designers, or maybe they don't call themselves, but they're doing design work.
Yes.
And so designers manage the application of technology.
Uh-huh.
And if you're not comprehensive, a comprehensive thinker, you are likely to do more damage than good with a design.
We have many designers who are not comprehensive.
Most are not, and as a matter of fact, comprehensive thought, which is looking for the patterns that connect, as Gregory Bateson showed so clearly. There's no course, there's no discipline of connecting things together. Universities are all specialties.
Yeah.
But nature doesn't have a department of zoology and a department of meteorology and a department of geology.
Not at all. Not at all.
Nature is the whole thing.
It's a seamless web.
And
consciousness.
And there's no formal courses in colleges that let you examine the connections.
Right.
And some people talk about interdisciplinary courses, but if you ever try doing that in a college, you'll find that you're going as rough. And in any case, what is really needed is an omnidisciplinary.
Comprehensive.
Yes, everything.
Yeah, right. And that was Fuller, or he attempted.
Fuller called for that because he said if you don't think comprehensively, you're going to make terrible things happen as well as good things happen.
Oh.
And this indeed happens a lot.
Yes, indeed.
And it's inevitable because any technology has a good side and a bad side.
Uh-huh.
And, I mean, you could even say that nuclear power has a good side. It does make power.
Oh, right. Well, the information or learning is a one-way thing. You can't unlearn things. I think Dr. Fuller showed that. I mean, we're always learning new things, and it's a one-way direction of always gaining more knowledge.
But they have to be the right things.
Right. Or they could be, if I may, in a synergistic kind of, he always used to say, there's nothing absolutely certain, and it's a synergistic, it's the behavior system's unpredicted by its parts, the sum of its parts, and it may be that we may not, we have to keep that as an opening option, existentially or something, we may not, as he used to put it, make it.
Well,
as a species.
True.
I mean, with this Promethean power we have, it could be put to, the wrong kind of use, and we could destroy the species.
Well, there are many
possibility.
There are many scientists now who think that we're in trouble.
Yeah.
And I think there's ample evidence of that.
Mm-hmm.
I've often thought when people say there are unexpected side effects of some enterprise, unexpected means you didn't know what you were doing completely. And there is a problem here because it's impossible to know everything because the universe is continuously evolving.
Yeah.
So the universe is renewing itself.
Right.
In fact, Fuller never said the universe. I misspoke then. It's universe.
Yes, that's
because
right.
Universe is not a thing like a sculpture.
It's an a priori mysterious
It's
design.
a happening.
It's a happening.
Continuously.
The universe seems to be a verb. There are no objects, and I mean, the physics sort of prove that to be correct in a certain sense. It's an a priori mysterious design to universe of synergistic resonances, and that seems to be what modern physics tells us, too. I mean,
and there's a lot of things that
theory
have affected us and will continue to affect us where the actual happening happened a long time ago, or it has been initiated, like there might be a comet about to hit the Earth.
Yeah, right.
And it's been headed this way for a long time.
That's right. Or we get a sense of it. Yeah, right. Or they take these, they had a photograph of the Big Bang or something, a material 300,000 years after the beginning of the Big Bang. And it's just hard to imagine. I mean, it's really incredible times in which we live. We want to talk about them. We want to particularly, talk about Fuller. He was absolutely the Leonardo da Vinci of our times, and that's even, in a certain sense, you can hardly speak more highly of him. He should be better well known. But I wonder if maybe we have it in the studio. We have a tape, and because we're talking. You're in town now, in a certain sense, to help launch this Millennial Whole Earth catalog that's just out, and we have a little tape that's from the. And also to launch Chris Zeloff's film, incredibly good film, which is beginning to revive some of the spirit of Bucky Fuller and so forth in a way, particularly for some of the younger people. But it talks about the Whole Earth catalog and you and so forth. And maybe if we could in the studio set up that film and let's run that. And it's a little bit of your own background where you live. It'll fill in. You're out in California, but we'll run that and then we'll come back. It takes about 3 or 4 minutes, and we'll come back. We're speaking with Jay Baldwin, and if you could set that up and run that film now, then please.
The Whole Earth Catalogue celebrated design as a way of life.
The Whole Earth Catalog started in 1968, and for the 2 years before that, I kept running into Buckminster Fuller, And at some point, when I was trying to figure out what to do next with my life, some of the things he pointed at having to do primarily with tools and also some sense of understanding whole systems came together. And indeed, the Whole Earth catalog that we finally came out with, opening words in it were Buckminster Fuller's insights initiated this catalog. Whole Earth catalog took a definitely countercultural relationship to technology, and we went out of our way to not only become smart about technology, but to take over the control of it and invent our own.
Stuart Brand came to me because he had heard that I read catalogs. He said, I want to make this a thing called the Whole Earth Catalog so that anyone on Earth can pick up a telephone and find out the complete information on anything. He said, that's my goal. That if people have good information, they will do the right thing.
Machinist.
Welcome back. Okay, so that we're back now speaking with Jay Baldwin, and you know that sort of set up the catalog. It got started in 1967, and as Stuart Brand and others said, the original Whole Earth catalog was inspired by the thinking originally of Buckminster Fuller. He was one of the original comprehensive thinkers with this idea of thinking comprehensively. There weren't that many people around who were thinking comprehensively. He was starting new ground. He sort of went off on a new tack in 1927, don't you think? He was born in 1895. We're coming up to the centenary. Maybe you could share a little bit of his background or so. He had a major crisis point in his life around 1927, and then he dedicated himself to this comprehensive view of the world that is, he's an amazing figure. And I wonder if maybe you could just share a little of his background for the audience.
He had tried making money as an entrepreneur, and he had failed as an entrepreneur for a number of reasons, not all of which were his fault. His background, he was a machinist. He'd been thrown out of Harvard a couple of times for shenanigans, and certainly not for not being intelligent enough. Then he did a stint in the Navy, and he learned a lot in the Navy because the naval ships at that time were very much self-contained. They had to do everything aboard. So he began thinking about how systems, life support systems, fit together. Because on a ship, the food, the drink, the water, the heat, and the medicine, and everything all has to be there.
Has to be ship
aboard. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was the one who originated the term spaceship Earth, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which may or may not be a good way to think of the Earth.
Okay.
Some people object to it being too mechanistic. But it is an interesting metaphor when it comes to the idea that we are riding on the Earth, and we're also messing it up, which doesn't seem very wise to mess up your own spaceship.
Right.
What I learned from him is to think as widely as I can as I'm developing a design project, to think of everything that I can bring to it, and think right through, what are the materials I'm using, what is getting those materials due to the Earth, what's going to happen to the object when we're done using it, what's going to happen to the workers that make it. All of this has to be considered. And one of the things, the most important ideas that Fuller had is what he called ephemeralization.
Yes, incredible.
What he used that word. People say doing more with less, but the elegant word is ephemeralization.
Yeah.
And he thought that there's two ways to be ephemeral. One is to use less materials by being smaller when it makes sense to be small. And the other is to use geometric principles, since any use of materials involves some sort of geometry.
Right, okay.
Is to use geometric principles that are used in nature to use the least amount of any material possible and still do the job you need to do.
Right.
So
and that is, in a sense, good design.
Yes, that is.
Right.
And for instance, his geodesic domes were thinner with respect to the space inside them than an eggshell is to the egg.
Amazing.
In the ratio of material to sheltered area.
By far the most efficient way to enclose space.
Yes. And to do it using geodesic structure is the most efficient way to enclose the space. A dome is the most efficient closure. Well, a sphere is, but dome.
Yeah.
It's hard to live in the whole sphere. So.
Right.
Though he did, it isn't impossible, by the way.
Well,
he had designs for living in spheres.
Yeah, but his synergetics, or the geometry of geodesics, was built into, in a certain sense, patterning nature's pattern itself, in a sense that he had for these things. And it was built upon a comprehensive view, and he set himself up as a comprehensivist when, as you said before, academically and in a certain sense, all of those people on Ford's assembly line and all the other metaphors of Western or world civilization was built upon a process of breaking everything down into specialized kind of patterns, and he was in a certain sense running counter to many of the tendencies that could be seen in the broader world. Appropriately so, but he was in a sense counter to many of the dimensions that the world was organizing itself in terms of.
Yes, he certainly was one of the first to, he wasn't the first to deplore wastefulness and inefficiency of materials, but he was among the first to discover ways that, so you didn't have to be wasteful. And that was quite a trick. So he made very good houses, for instance, that weighed 3 tons when a typical house weighs 150 tons, a typical Levittown type developer's home.
Yeah.
And a fancier house weighs much more than that. And I'm speaking now that there's some sense in making some parts of the interior of a house weigh a lot to store heat if you're going to make a solar house. But the shell of the house need not have that function.
That's it. And you're speaking now as one, if I may say so, who has followed and has tried to employ many of these principles in design functions in the real world edifices and constructs, and you've worked in a certain sense like he did as a sort of guinea pig for the ideas and have actually tested them. So it isn't with you just all abstract when you talk about these things. You've actually engaged in, and we had a little hint of it in the film clip, but that's interesting. So that these principles of design have application to the real world, and that dome does not leak or something. You know, you've taken these things in other than just abstract. It is possible to see Buckminster Fuller as a philosopher. Well, I mean, he is a design scientist,
and he
was a philosopher. Yeah.
He held a poetry chair at Harvard.
Yeah. Yes, right.
But if you pushed him hard enough about his various attributes, he would whip out his machinist union card, which was up to date.
Really?
He was just a machinist.
He was a machinist, so he knew about those practical realities.
But from following his ideas, the structure that I made that worked the best anyway, managed to I made a structure in which you could raise bananas in February in Cape Cod.
That's a pillow dome.
The pillow dome.
Yes.
And the actual amount of material between the indoors and the outdoors was 12 thousandths of an inch.
Good Lord. Was that Teflon then?
It was a derivative of Teflon. It's called Tefzel. It's a DuPont product.
So you actually put a dome up. Was that at the Alchemy Institute?
The New Alchemy Institute, yes.
And you had a dome that was, how large was that dome?
It's 31 feet.
30, is that 30, if I may, Jay, is that 31 feet as the dome connects with the ground?
Yes, diameter.
So 31 feet, and it would have covered about how many square feet?
About 750 approximately.
750 square feet. And it was a geodesic structure with a Teflon, and you had an insulating gas or something between the 2 layers of argon, right?
It was 3 layers thick, and it was filled with argon, which is an inert gas that's a better insulator than air, and it's also will extinguish a fire. So if the building was assaulted by a flame big enough to actually burn a hole in the skin, then the gas would come out and
but I mean,
take away the flame.
But I mean that, and the thing itself, the structure, including the struts or whatever involved in making the geodesic superstructure, it weighed 500 pounds or something.
Less than 500 pounds.
500 pounds.
So that's a half a pound a square foot of floor.
Right.
about a quarter pound a square foot of structure.
And it would sit there and it would be insulated, and there's some even finer insulation films that can be put on these
Yes.
materials now. All the time we're making progress.
I could triple its performance using materials today.
Really?
If I built a new one
when
right
did you
now.
do that? When did you do that originally?
Made that in 1980.
1980.
And it still exists, though it's been vandaled.
Yeah, right. But you built that there on Cape Cod, and
Yes.
in there it was so, it had furnaces and things.
No furnace.
It was all done
solar.
by the solar,
Yes.
and you could grow within that bananas?
Yeah.
In Cape Cod, that's pretty amazing, right? I mean, that you were able to reach that kind of efficiency.
And the heat sinks in those domes were, in other words, where the heat was stored,
Yeah.
was stored in fish tanks. And then the water in the fish tanks, which is filled with fish exhaust, if I may use the
Fish exhaust, yeah, right.
is ammonia.
Uh-huh.
And that is a very good fertilizer.
Right.
So that was used in the gardens inside the structure. And those domes were not made to be lived in. It was that particular dome at New Alchemy Institute was intended as an indoor garden.
Right.
And so the dome was engineered specifically to aid the plants in growing, not just to be a glass window between them and the outdoors.
Right.
But I actually chose the thickness of the material and the characteristics of the material to permit the correct wavelengths of light that would encourage plants to grow, and also it let in the ultraviolet, which discourages the growth of obnoxious beings and fungus,
Right.
fungi,
Uh-huh.
so that it was not necessary to use pesticides or herbicides indoors.
Marvelous.
And that was just as well, because they would have killed the fish anyway.
Yes, I see. Right. You're taking that in as comprehensively as one could.
Yes.
Those things, and to be able to use the materials that are available, and always keeping an eye out for new materials and new things that synergistically have come along, because we get advantages all the time.
I'd like to point out something here that I've always considered important for the
Please.
40 years or so I've been doing this,
Right.
which is that all this kind of work is we learn from each other.
Yeah.
It's kind of a group of us that has developed over the years, and we learn from one another. So John Todd has learned something about greenhouses and something about fish and something about making them work together. This is way before Biosphere 2, by the way.
Yeah. He makes these living machines.
Living machines,
Yeah,
he called
right,
them.
Yeah.
And I learned about structures from Bucky
Yeah.
and from some of his graduate students that were older than I was at the University of Michigan.
Uh-huh.
And then I also learned some things about people working at a high school and with college students. And I learned about mass production from my own degree, which was in automobile design.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And I learned biology because I spent a lot of time outdoors. I spent 6 years of my life living outdoors.
Really? That's a lot.
And-
you mean actually out in the
and
wilderness?
6 years worth of nights lived in tents or with just outdoors.
You have a nomad in you, or you
I
like
do.
the wilderness, and you like the
I
nature,
like to
and
be
you like the
outdoors,
patterns,
yeah.
and that. Yeah, you've done that. And you've traveled all over the world.
Yes.
Yeah, been
And-
able to do this, and
and
these
so-
are all on your own initiatives, in a sense. I
Yes.
mean, you've always been on your own, in a sense,
Yes.
just as a guinea pig out there on the edge, like Mr. Fuller was. He said he's been able to survive on the edge, without being all caught up within huge bureaucratic organizations and so forth.
When I met Bucky, I was 18.
Yes.
And he called himself Guinea Pig B for Bucky, and he regarded life as a big experiment, and he had appointed himself the guinea pig.
Uh-huh.
I thought that was a great idea, and
Yeah.
since my name begins with B also, I decided I would also be Guinea Pig B, Guinea Pig B2 maybe.
You could be BJ, because a lot of people call you BJ. You could be guinea pig BJ.
So I've lived my life pretty much as I saw fit
Uh-huh.
to do so without hurting
JB.
anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And this, by not specializing particularly, but paying attention to what I saw happening in front of me, which was all too often different what it said in the books was happening.
Yes,
Except
exactly.
for the physics and the microbiology was what was happening, and that was what was important.
Yeah.
I began to sort of knit things together, and I had always found, since I was a small child, I found that competition was a deplorable enterprise.
I see, right.
I didn't like that, because competition means you win, somebody else has to lose.
Right.
And what we're trying to do as Earth citizens is everybody win.
Right, if we can get to that.
If we can get to that.
That's the challenge.
So I thought one of the ways that's going to help people get to that is to do something about the unbalanced distribution of the Earth's resources. Some people have a lot of it. The United States citizens have a lot of it, of resources.
Yeah.
And this means somebody somewhere else doesn't. And one of the reasons that the disbalance happens is because we, not just the United States citizens, but the citizens of all industrial cultures, use materials inefficiently and in a totally wasteful manner.
Yeah, we have. We've raped the earth to build this industrial.
But the thing is, we didn't need to do this.
Yeah.
We could have a lot of the stuff that we need anyway, not some of the stuff that we don't need. That's dangerous.
Yeah.
We could live better than we live now without trashing the earth. And there are other countries where people live as well as we do or better on 60% of the energy that we use, for instance.
That's interesting.
In Denmark, Swedes and Danes live as well and in some ways better than we do on much less energy.
That's interesting.
So that means the difference in the energy use is pure waste. That means we are just wasting energy, which is out of the question, to keep doing that, especially when other people need the energy.
Right.
Or the materials.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I mean, our cars weigh far too much.
Right.
The
enclosing space could be done much more efficiently,
Yes.
as you demonstrate with a pillow dome or other kinds of things.
Well, I'm not expecting people to live in a dome necessarily, as I am fond of pointing out. If you replaced every single family home in Los Angeles with a highly efficient dome, you would not solve very many of the problems of Los Angeles.
You have to go to something like Paulo Solari's views of urban conglomerate. People are going to have to live in closer proximity. Yeah.
But Los Angeles is not closer proximity, and you're not going to
it's
tear it down.
Right, right.
So it may fall down someday. Parts of it are. But the lesson of Los Angeles is this is not a good thing to do. And it's probably nature doesn't permit us to do this.
Yeah, it won't, or it will react to us, right?
Yes.
And we're beginning to, increasingly people are beginning to see that. Even people in positions of responsibility for their major institutions are seeing it. We had the Rio conference, and the sense of ecology is beginning to dawn on people beyond just a small, relatively smaller numbers of people that have traditionally been interested in these things. Mr. Gore and some of the people in positions of leadership are seeing that now. But I wonder, back to Fuller again. He's such a seminal figure in terms of, in my view, in terms of the age. And he had this design science, or anticipatory design science, where he built upon the idea of nature, and he brought so many words and so much poetry into the 9 million pages, as you tell me, of materials that could go into making a biography. He was incredibly prolific. He was he was interested in everything. He had a comprehensive view. And it's possible to see him not only as a design scientist, the geodesic principles, the Dymaxion car we can talk about, the Dymaxion home that he developed, and some of these other principles, many of which were not, unfortunately, picked up on or able to find their way into the world as effectively as they may have or might still. But he was also a philosopher. And, I mean, he had an overall view of what mankind's function in the universe was. And if I'm not mistaken, you knew him well, you're a student, you're an embodiment in a certain sense. And it's,
artifact.
Artifact. It's in your JB, not BJ, I should say, it's JB. But in any case, but he would always, in a certain sense, if I'm not correct, if I'm not wrong, he would in a certain sense see universe as it's an a priori mysterious design.
No, it's mysterious, all right.
Yeah, it's an a priori mystery, so he wasn't an absolutist.
No, not at all.
Not at all. And it was made up of, and he brought synergy. It was made up of a series of synergistic resonances. He brought synergy into the library, into the language. He would ask people, 100,000 people in an audience, have you ever heard the word synergy? And 3 or 4 hands would go up.
And they didn't know what it
meant. They didn't know. But now everyone in the world knows, But he was way ahead of his time in that. But it was made up of a series of resonancy of interaccommodative systems. And he also had, just speaking now philosophically, we can go to some of the design in a minute. Philosophically, he looked about in the universe and said, is there a purpose to biological evolution, or mankind as part of a biological evolutionary purpose? And didn't he see it, in a certain sense, as being anti-entropic? That the second law of thermodynamics that physics will show is that all systems tend to move toward chaos, or absolute zero, to the limit of the systems, and that the biological process, I guess, apexed by mankind, was moving across entropy and bringing increased patterns of understanding to the process of which we are a part. And philosophically, that was an important grounding principle that he seemed to have, or am I wrong in that?
No,
maybe we could begin at the beginning in the most comprehensive view of things, which would be, in a certain sense, this universal principle, and try to get some grounding principles by which we get an understanding of what biology and mankind's purpose in the universe is.
Well, he pointed out that that everything in the universe seemed to be balanced, and that entropy didn't seem to have a balance. And he decided that, he proposed anyway, that the balance of entropy would be knowledge, be intellect. This is hubris at its most hubristic. However, there's probably something to that. And I have found, as he recommended, I have to get this in here, he told me when I was 18 that I didn't have to look for work.
Yeah.
And I didn't. I never have. I've never looked for a job.
To earn a living.
To earn a living. He said if you're doing what you were made to do, you don't need to earn a living. You'll get paid somehow. You may not get paid a lot of bucks, but you'll live a good life. And I'm 61, and I've lived a very fine life. I really like the way things have gone for me. I don't have a lot of money, and I don't have a big nest egg saved up to retire. I'm not going to retire. Who wants to retire from this? We're having a great time.
Right.
So he said then that what human beings should do is to act in an anti-entropic way. That is to say, that you increased knowledge, that you taught other people when possible, that everybody should be teachers. Everybody that's capable of teaching should be a teacher. And that pretty much is what I've been. And that's what the Whole Earth Catalog is. The Whole Earth Catalog is a big, fat teacher. And it's a lot of people teaching. It's like going to an amazing university to get into there.
Yeah, this is before the Internet.
And this was done on purpose. Yes, and the Internet, you can bet we're going to have this sort of thing on the Internet pretty soon.
And of course there's a great deal of all that cybernetic stuff in here, in the hyperspace and cyberspace.
Because Stuart Brand's idea was that you should be able to find out anything about anything on one phone call. Right. And that was the goal. Yeah. And we're a long way from that still, but we're a lot closer than we were in 1968.
Yeah, just bring it with one keystroke now.
Yeah, one keystroke.
That'll be what's coming. These young people are going to go along with those computers.
Anyway,
Fuller as a philosopher.
Yeah, Bucky had found out from his own life, the way he lived it, that when he worked for the good of the many, that his life went well, and when he didn't work for the good of the many, instead of just for the good of himself, he worked for everybody. When he just worked for himself, things went badly. When he worked for the many, things went well. And the more universally, the wider band of goodness that he tried to, and benefit that he tried to work into what he did, the better things went for him. And he said, this means that there's a message in this. This isn't just superstition. This is what happened. So I thought, well, yeah, maybe that's superstition. Maybe it's not.
It's such a beautiful idea.
One would hope
it's such a beautiful idea. I mean, it should be, and that's what all of our sages have told us.
Yes, it is what all.
But it runs counter to what so many of our institutions encourage people to do. It encourages them all to become specialist and selfish and greedy, and that's the way we can see so much of the world going. And they're very spiritually dead at the core very often at the end of that process.
I'm not prepared to talk about somebody else's spirituality.
I know that was
but I can tell you
unfair on my part. But
I have lived my life according to those ideas, and it's gone very well.
Yeah, good for you.
A few little bleeps now and then. I mean, things happen.
Yeah.
But I found that also the more people that you work for, the better things go. And I also found an interesting thing. Fuller one day angrily denounced somebody who said, well, they just couldn't see being so altruistic.
Yes.
And he said, I am not altruistic.
Ah, really?
And I also take this view. I resent being called an altruist.
All right. That's
because it is so totally wrong-headed. I am not an altruist.
Why isn't that being altruistic? Should you be concerned with all kinds of people?
Yes, but it's a perfectly practical matter. It is something that we have to do.
Uh-huh.
We don't have we have the choice of being nasty and terrible and making things worse, just like anybody. You can always be awful.
All right.
But if we're going to go forward, you have to take everybody with you. If you leave somebody behind, that person will be filled with hate. And that's the heart of wars.
Yes, it is indeed, yeah.
Conflict.
But there are many, many people who are really ready to leave the hindmost behind.
That's true, but they don't. It is unnecessary.
And
it's a bad thing to do, because just think if you sat down in the middle of Rwanda where people are starving,
yes,
and set out your Thanksgiving dinner, build a fence around it so nobody could get at it, and those people were dying, or even more so, their children were dying before their very eyes, while you eat 5 times more food than you need.
Well, that's essentially what's going on.
Are those people going to be feeling good about you? They sure are not.
They are not. But isn't that essentially what's going on?
Yeah, it is what's
going on in the world now. And the people who have that Thanksgiving dinner are piling more ducks and turkeys and sausages and all kinds of things onto their plate as the people continue to starve, and the injustices are there. And the leaders of the world will very often say this is exactly the way things are and ought to be, and let's go further down that road.
Well, that's because for many...
And people will follow in that and try to get at that rich man's table if they can. I mean, that's the way the world seems to be running, by and large. Fuller was, by and large, by this idea. He used to say, if one of us is hungry, we're all hungry.
That's right.
In a sense, he was a bodhisattva, in a sense, in the Hindu Vedic tradition. And there aren't that many bodhisattvas around, or are there, do you think?
I think when people act their worst when they're afraid.
Yeah.
And there was a time when people were not expected to live very long. Even at the time I was born, you're only supposed to live to, I think, 53.
Uh-huh.
And most people lived a short, painful life.
And brutish, someone said. Was it Hobbes? Yeah.
The life of the brute.
Mm.
And as we have gotten away from that, so that it now is apparent that you don't have to live a short, brutish life, a lot of people consider that there isn't enough to go around for everybody, and virtually all of the major religions preach that things will be better later.
Right.
Because the major religions were founded at a time when you lived a short, brutish life.
That's correct.
But now, what we're saying, it is obvious, science has shown, when you figure out what it takes to feed somebody, what it takes to shelter somebody, what it takes to make them feel pretty good about being alive, and have something worthwhile to do. Notice I'm not saying something to slave at.
Exactly.
That this can be done right now. The only reason it's not being done is because people don't have the will, or they're so terrified of being one of the people on the bottom of the unjust and unbalanced distribution of wealth, material wealth, that it makes them so afraid they can't think straight.
Yeah.
And they tend to be very superstitious then.
Yeah.
Why is everything bad happening to me? The gods must be angry or whatever.
Right.
And why is everything happening good to the other people?
And people in positions of authority will traditionally
exploit
that fear, and in fact even create it. And
on purpose.
In order to have social control.
But it's unnecessary, and I'm not talking communist here at all. And one of the things, I am very strongly in favor of people thinking for themselves.
Yeah.
This is not thinking for them. Thinking for yourself does not disadvantage anyone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Grabbing for yourself does, but thinking for yourself doesn't. What the Whole Earth Catalog and the Whole Earth Review magazine are intended, the basic editorial intent of these publications is to encourage people to think for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Universities don't, and high schools don't, grade schools don't. What they talk about...
Corporate bureaucracies.
And
and most government bureaucracies.
Right.
And what most people are doing do not call people to think for themselves.
Right. And if you try to think for yourself, you end up often getting punished for doing what what you were
Exactly.
actually designed and built to do,
Exactly.
which is think.
Yeah, but when you think about it, Jay, when you think about it, we're talking about the things that most people do not really go according to what it is they're really designed to do.
That's right.
No, we're talking in a very large,
been-
large-scale indictment of institutions
Yes.
by which people interrelate.
It's been beaten out of them. I don't think purposely. I don't think anybody's being malicious.
Right.
I think it's inadvertent.
Or even the parents of the child will say, by all means, be practical so
Yes.
that you can earn your living, because we don't want to see you ending up in the gutter with people who have been left behind and have been allowed to be left behind in that nightmare that James Joyce called that history that James Joyce called a nightmare,
Yes.
from which we're attempting to awaken.
It's more likely Gurdjieff's idea of everybody sleepwalking.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, Gurdjieff saw that, right? Yes, somnambulistic.
Yeah, the somnambulist.
Yeah.
I tend to think that's right. I often challenge my students by saying, when was the last time, I ask them, when was the last time you really sat down and thought something completely through on your own? And I found that most of them can't remember a time doing that. I'm not talking about thinking through, well, I just figured out what I'm going to have for dinner.
Yes, I understand.
That's not what I mean.
Yeah.
But I mean, just really something you don't understand and try just, how does this work? What's going on here?
Yeah.
And
think it through.
It's very rare.
Right.
You get to do that.
Yeah. You don't get to do it within the patterns by which the society
And
works,
you're-
or you're not encouraged to.
Well, yeah, you're not encouraged to, and you're also not taught to.
Uh-huh.
And even things that traditionally seem to be encouraging leadership. An example I use, which is very irritating to many people, but I still think it's true, is that let's take the example of the captain of the high school football team.
Yes. All right.
There is a young leader on the way up. But the captain of the high school football team is the kid who, in addition to having skill that he practiced, you always got to practice and so forth. I can't dodge that. But he is obeying most perfectly the rules set down by a previous generation.
That's
He
right.
is not thinking for himself, and he is not thinking ahead, and he is not innovating. And in fact, he is very carefully being restricted by a set of very tight rules that he is attempting assiduously to follow in order to get the prize.
Follow the score.
Yes.
Follow the score.
That's how you get
laid
the
down,
prize.
yeah. It's not very.
That is an artificial situation, and you could look at the way our society is set up as a great big football game with several captains, but not all that many.
Yeah.
And there's only one kid in the high school as the captain.
Or the Academy in
Well,
Paris.
there's the rest.
Or the Academy in Paris just scoffing at the work of Vincent van Gogh or
Or
something
whatever.
and saying, oh, it's not the way we do things, you know. And there's always been the Academy and the establishment in a certain sense. And we're in that kind of a situation now
Oh, we sure are, yes.
on Spaceship Earth. There's World Trade Organizations going through, GATT,
sorry.
Uruguay rounds going through, the multinational corporations who are running this world are running it ever more vociferously. They now have access to a world market of near slave-like labor that they can do. The advantages that have been built up in the developed world are going to be brought into challenge, and we have this condition. But before that, I wonder if we could go back to this. We were talking about Fuller as a philosopher, and he had this very interesting, if I may, and you get set it straight, because he was looking at things comprehensively, and he had within World Game that Medard Gable and other people who worked with him down in Philadelphia,
Yes.
he had this concept of World Game,
Yes.
and he looked at all the resources of the world from this comprehensive context. Again, not necessarily taking into the elegance of design, which could be ephemeralization, could be brought into an appropriately operating, design principles for running Spaceship Earth, as it were, but in a certain sense the pattern that's evolving. And he looked back through all of history, and he drew up a coefficiency of haves and have-nots.
Yes.
You're familiar with it. Right. And he said in his reckoning he had that those who were haves, that throughout history there had been less than 1%. There had been the pharaohs, and then there had been
Yes.
the great mass of the peasants and that sort of thing. Then came the Industrial Revolution, raped the earth, a lot of destruction, but at the same time, these curves started going up in terms of the number of people that in the abstract were able to be provided with livingry, that he called, as opposed to living,
basic life support.
Basic life support, and it had gone up to where, if I'm not correct, in 1952, he had come to a coefficiency of the haves and the have-nots on a whole system world scale, and he had said that there were 43%, by his reckoning,
yes,
calling it a little finely, but it's still the principle and the idea is very important, that in his reckoning, 43% of the world population could be seen to be haves relative to the technologically augmented capability collectively or comprehensively seen, whereas what, 56% then would be have-nots, or 57% would be have-nots. And he said in 1952 that we had a 20-year period of imminent crisis to all human institutions as we approached and crossed the 50% mark. From after which, because we were gaining through technological development and synergistic development, we were gaining, and that we would cross that 50% mark about 20 years out from 1952. Some people, and that from that time on, it would be possible, whereas historically it wasn't, it would be possible if human institutions predicated on a comprehensively understood general premise or proposition that there were more haves and have-nots in the world relative to the technologically augmented capability of providing life support or livingry, and it would be possible to have institutions predicated on the understanding of sufficiency or even perhaps surplus rather than scarcity, which had been the zero-sum scarcity situation, which had been the historical context within which human, or Ricardo or any of the others, within which human institutions had evolved. Am I more or less got that correct?
Yeah, you have that.
And if it is, if I may, just a little addendum, that concept, even if he was off a little bit on a year here or there, some people say we crossed that line. That's what Bobby Dylan was singing about, was blowing in the wind back in 1969-70 or something. We were crossing that line intuitively grasped. But that concept, even if he was off a little bit on the date or the not or the little or something, that idea of that we may actually have a new situation, which is that there is sufficiency as an epistemological or ontological or teleologic reality in the world, is an idea of gigantic importance and doesn't seem to ever be brought up in the normal public dialogue of our political and or just our general cultural leadership or so forth. But it would be the principal idea, if there's correct validity to this, and he established a baseline of bringing the object, the concept up in these world game musings and so forth. And I just wonder if you could comment on, nothing could be more important than that, and if it is true, we should have a Manhattan Project to try and measure that and get at it, because that's the reality within which new possibilities would be there from the entropic ones that many people see as just projecting past patterns.
I think that Bucky is certainly right, showing that there are more people, not only in actual numbers, but as a percentage of the total population, living in a let's say, a healthy way. But he did leave something out, which is he did not figure in the cost to the earth that it took to raise the haves to being the majority, which I think they probably are now, even though there's a great disparity between the haves and the have-nots. The disparity is getting greater, but the percent of haves is also rising, so it's a race, kind of. But the haves got their haveness at a dreadful cost.
Yes, but he had to have known that, because he was talking about the Industrial Revolution.
But
and back in the days of Dickens, and it was all being, this was done. Go ahead, I'm sorry, I didn't interrupt you.
That's true, but the extractive technologies, mining, so forth, I don't think that he looked closely enough into that. The latest ecological knowledge shows that there's been a much bigger price than we thought to make the haves haves, and there are many people who contend that the haves are only temporarily haves, and the reason is topsoil. We're getting a lot more bushels of wheat per acre than we used to. So farming has gotten more efficient. But for each bushel of wheat, we are losing 3 bushels of topsoil. And the topsoil is not being replaced at that rate.
That can't be allowed to go on.
So it can't be allowed to go on.
Right.
And the consequence of that is that we may be eating fairly well now, but in the near future we may not be eating well. And I've seen some pretty horrendous calculations on that.
Well,
and Fuller, these numbers didn't come up until after Fuller's death in 1983. And there's some really very unpleasant things coming at us. And part of it is from overpopulation. Fuller thought that the Earth could withstand a lot more people than it has on it now.
Mm-hmm.
But whether they were living well or not is another matter.
Well, I'm just wondering, perhaps, you were closer to him, so you knew the man warts and all, more than I did. I saw him from a distance in a certain sense, and it was admired. I met him a couple of times, but I had an admiration of him. But it seems to me, in a certain sense, that if humanity, collectively, and we look, if we were able to get to, Mr. Bush, as president, derisively said, that vision thing, Yeah. And he would say the vision thing. That is, do we know what we're doing? Here comes the end of the communism. Here comes the end of the wall. Here comes this and that. And do they have a geopolitical or a structure, or do they have an economic? They don't have a binary economic system to match the binary system that we have now. We need some new kind of an economic system. We need a new transformed kind of context for operating this world if we're not going to go down. We're following the same old course that we've had historically, and if we were to find that there was sufficiency, it's a different thing. That fellow in Rwanda, if you're in Rwanda and you're eating that dinner, and then all of a sudden everybody around you is starting to be able to, you realize that there is enough in an abstract. It's a different concept by which the fear and the greed and the fear that you said is the result. It's a psychological condition,
yes,
in a sense, that makes it possible to adopt alternate patterns rather than the war making. I can see us slipping back into war, zero-sum thinking, and that it would be possible then to introduce, in a certain sense, a design revolution of real proportion that could link with the historically inherited institutions, transforming them in an appropriate way, and that, there could be a linking up. Fuller never was, he was always one, if I may, he thought that it would be possible to make it possible to have, if you realize that, it would be possible to have something, that they wouldn't have to have some collective socialist something.
No, not at all.
It would be possible to have one that could maintain individual initiative, a pattern, but could be so comprehensively appropriate as involving everyone.
Fuller was a big enemy of political systems in general.
Yeah, and in general agglomerations of power and bureaucratization, and called for individual initiative.
One of the problems is especially our universities.
Yes.
There's a friend of mine, David Orr, who's a professor at Oberlin College in Ohio, has suggested in a new book that just came out called Earth in Mind, he makes a pretty convincing case that the universities themselves are examples in the way they're operated of what we should not be doing.
Yes, right.
And so the medium is the message,
yes, right,
kind of thing. And he is trying to make Oberlin be the first example of a university behaving as the society should behave in the future, and that students there will be just the fact that they're there, it'll rub off on them that this is a good way to run things. He hasn't got Oberlin to work that way yet, but he's made a start, and that's more than anybody else has done it.
Amen, amen, amen.
And the very idea that you think of it that way, he pointed out, for instance, that Oberlin was importing the food that the students ate there from thousands of miles away, when in fact it's embedded in a farmland territory.
Yeah, it's pretty absurd.
Why not augment the local economy?
Yeah.
Why not? It couldn't be more efficient to buy lettuce from California than it could be to buy it from Ohio.
Well, we got a World Trade Organization that's trying to say that is the case.
We'll see about that.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of bad things to be said for that.
It's going to go through the Senate almost sure as a knife goes through butter,
we'll
and the people aren't. Yeah, but we do. I was just again, and these. What are the conditions that are going to allow effectively a design science revolution to find its way into the human society? We can do things on our own initiative while the corporate superstructure continues to operate and so forth, but it's a little hard to do You know, and if there isn't a larger anti-entropic calling, which is to somehow involve the whole of the people involved in this spaceship Earth to find a new way where everybody wins. That's the really large ball game.
We need some
if we need that, and you understand?
Yeah.
And it would be nice if somebody talked about, if there is a reality epistemologically or teleologic of sufficiency that could allow a design revolution, then that could change the psychology of the people who are in charge of the major institution.
What really changes people's psychology is to engage themselves in the quest. And
right.
That's why I have deliberately lived in the stuff that I do. And
yes,
I encourage
indeed.
my students to do that.
Right.
Let me get back to that dome at the New Alchemy Institute.
All right.
And, the name New Alchemy sounds a little hokey to some, but in fact the New Alchemy Institute was a very large receiver of National Science Foundation grants. The purpose of those greenhouses at New Alchemy was to show that you could raise vegetables in New England in the winter and fish at the same time, since it was a system that used veggies and fish, produced veggies and fish. The New England states import 96% of their food from out of the area. This means that essentially all of their food money leaves New England, which is one of the reasons New England has a bad economy as a section of the country, is in a sorry state. Some of the states are very bad. And so John Todd had the idea that if you could raise the vegetables in New England, that you could keep a lot of the money from leaving New England, which would improve the local economy then.
Right, right.
And because one good way to have an income is to not spend.
Right, right.
So then then he said, well, he and his friends said, well, but you can't afford to run a greenhouse in New England because it takes power to run a greenhouse. It takes fuel to run a greenhouse, and fuel is expensive. Moreover, the New England states import from out of state more than 90% of their fuel.
Yeah.
And so not only is their food money leaving New England, but their fuel money is too, which adds even more to their economic problems. So the only hope then would be to make a solar-powered greenhouse.
And you did.
And we did. All right. Now, why don't you see them all over the place?
Well,
well, that's a good question. The problem with any really radical idea like that, I mean, people know you can't raise vegetables in the winter with snow, is that it takes a while for that kind of an idea to soak in.
Right.
And Bucky himself said that his ideas took about 50 years to become recognized, let alone applied. And we are finding that the New Alchemy Institute crew had it pretty well proven by the end of the 70s, the late 70s, that this was going to be possible in not only New England but in a lot of places.
Okay.
To do this, and I actually
we've only got about a minute left. So you better wipe it. Bring it down. So I mean, it does take a long time for these things to go.
Yes.
And the thing is that we've been a long time, but I would just say that you want to go into a systems where it's getting larger and larger patterns. And I was just trying to suggest that philosophically we might be able to get a pattern that could become in keeping with the danger of the time in which we find ourselves of finding a transformation, and I can't see one larger than this transference to where we could bring these design principles in, of there being enough, that we're coming into a new... Sorry, Jay, we didn't want to talk for 15 hours either. We've run out of time, and if we don't, we have to do it. But can I just say thank you, really, very much for all your work and for everything you've done. And to remind you in the audience, Jay Baldwin, the author, or one of the co-editors of Whole Earth Catalog, out now, Millennial Whole Earth Catalog, major follower of Buckminster Fuller's principles, and an extremely important people. Thank you, person. Thank you very, very much for you, and thank you, Jay, for coming in. Okay, we'll see you.